To create a fill, a gradient, or a pattern layer by itself, go up to Layer, go down to New Fill Layer, and here's the three options you can choose from. For a solid color, with it selected, the first thing it's going to ask you to do is to give it a name. I'm just going to keep everything by default. We'll say OK. And this will bring up your color picker. From here you can choose any color that you wish. And when you say OK, it's going to automatically fill in the entire layer with that one specific color. As a matter of fact, if you zoom in on your layers, you've got its own fill color layer that works all by itself. So you don't have to use the paint bucket, you don't have to paint in one solid area. This does the work for you. If you ever need to edit it, simply double click on the icon. That'll bring back up your color picker, and you can choose to change and tweak up this color by itself. I'll hit OK. Another option you can choose from is the gradient overlay or gradient fill layer. As with the other ones, the first thing it's going to do is ask you to give it a name. I'll say OK. Then it's going to bring up these gradient fill options. If you click the down arrow, you can choose from the pre-made gradient swatches, or if you click on the gradient swatch itself, it'll bring up your gradient editor, and this will give you full control over what your gradient will be. First of all, you can choose to place a color anywhere that you want to on the bottom sliders. The top sliders are usually black and white, and this controls your opacity. You can see this one's white, so it's completely transparent. So let's bring that back up to 100%. Let's double click and add on another one there. I can drag this one down. It works just the same as in Adobe Illustrator, choosing any color that you want. Now when I say OK, let's zoom back out, you can see I've got my gradation of the color. You can change up the style that you're working with. So you've got every type of style that you wanted. Let's say an angular one. You can even click on the layer and move it around where you want your gradient to start and stop. So if I needed it to go at the top there for that one, that's how you can do that. Same way for a linear one. You can even adjust the angle at which it'll be at. As soon as you're set with what it is, you can say OK. And as with the fill, you've also got your own layer by itself. You double click on the icon to bring back up your editing options. The final one was the pattern overlay. File or layer, fill color, pattern. Give it a name, say OK. With the pattern fill, you can only use the pre-existing patterns that you've already saved in Adobe Photoshop. In our case, I've got this textured pattern saved in there. Clicking the down arrow will show you the other fill patterns that are already loaded into Photoshop by itself. As with the other ones, you can click and drag and move your pattern around if necessary, and then you can hit OK to just lock it in. The thing to remember is these layers are going to work just like any other layer that you would fill in, but it gives you full control rather than having to choose a paint bucket or choose your paintbrush to paint over it. This is just a great quick way of putting a solid color or a solid pattern design within one layer that's behind what you're working on. Let's go ahead and trash that one out. The second thing we're going to learn is how to create a clipping mask. A clipping mask works much the same as a layer mask in that it allows you to obscure or show or hide different areas of one particular layer or one image that you're working with. For our class, we're going to take this photograph and we want to apply this silhouetted shape to it so that it looks like it's only the image is showing through the silhouetted shape. So let's open it up in Photoshop. I'll drag it down. Let's place her into the document that we're working on. Now remember, when we do this, she's on her own layer. For the shape that we're working in, I built it in Adobe Illustrator, so it's all vector. So I'm going to highlight it and press copy, Command C. Let's jump back into Photoshop. Now since it's vector, when I hit Command V to paste it in there, it's going to ask me for a couple of different options. In our case, for this one, we don't really care about being able to edit the vector shape, so I'm just going to choose pixels. And when I hit OK, it's going to first give me kind of a preview of what my object will look like. At this time I can size it and place it wherever I need it to be. And to lock it in, we'll hit return. And so now it's on its own layer by itself, just as a regular vectorized, a rasterized object. and the layer of the picture is below it. Now to mask out this particular area, what I want to do is I want to just see her face outlined by our object. Let's go back into our layers palette. I'll drag it off just so we can see it a little bit better. Here's the thing to remember. What you want to see has to be on top of the shape you want to cover it up. So I need to reorder by clicking and dragging on the layers so that her image is on top of the other one. With that selected, the layer 1, her image, let's go back up to layer, go down to create clipping mask. Now you can see this is what we wanted to do. It's masking over the area that's underneath it. Look in your layers palette. Notice that there's a little arrow icon pointing to layer 2. This means that whatever's on layer 1 is going to be obscured or shown by the pixels that are on layer 2. And this kind of works the same as a vector mask, excuse me, not a vector, layer mask, in that you have full control over what it is. The only difference is this gives you a little bit more control about where things are and how you can move and manipulate it around. I can still select layer 2, and I've got my move tool, and I can move, well, I've got the, let's turn off auto select. If I selected layer 2, I can move it around, and you can see now no matter where I place it, that's where it will be emphasized. That's where it will mask over that particular area. I can select layer 1 and move it around as well. So this is the advantage of using a clipping mask over a layer mask, which will just allow you to work within that one layer. All right. The final thing we'll talk about is how to actually use shapes and vectors in Photoshop. For these, we need to make sure we have our Paths palette opened up, and it's usually docked with the Layers palette on the far right-hand side. Remember, if you don't see it, you can always go to Window and choose Paths to open up this particular one. And I'll drag them both out so we can see what we're working with. The paths allow you to manipulate and create vector objects within Photoshop. So in our case, the tools that we're going to use, you've got a pen tool, and add anchor points, delete anchor points, even a free draw tool. These are all work the same as in Adobe Illustrator, in that you can add individual points to a vector path. You also have a particular selection tool that allows you to select and edit the paths that you create. These are going to be different from a normal selection tool in that they only work on vector objects. So don't try to select any other type of layer or object. Only these will allow you to edit it. And you've got some pre-made shapes tools that you can work with. These are the normal ones that are most commonly used, and you've even got some custom shapes tools. With these selected, let's go up to our top options that you need to know about. So I've chosen just a regular shape. The main thing to remember is on the far right hand side there's three types of vector shapes you can create. You can create a shape, and with it selected it'll allow you to have a fill color and a stroke color, and you can adjust the size of the stroke and everything from here. Notice that you can also have a gradation and a pattern overlay within your within the object that you have. Same way for the stroke. If you chose just a path, this will allow you to create a vector object, but it won't give you the options to fill it in. It's only making a path to create. And the pixels will allow you to create a shape that you're creating, but it won't give you the vector ability to manipulate and change it. It'll just create that shape in pixels, and that's it on whatever layer that you're working on. Let's go back up and choose shape. With it selected, we'll go ahead and just create a rectangle on here. When I've created the rectangle, look in your layers palette. I've got a rectangle shape, and it's got its own little icon selected inside of it. This means that no matter what I create within this layer, it's always going to be a rectangle. I can go up to my fill color, change it up to any other type of color. I can even add a stroke to it. Let's see, make it something that we can see. And that's what I'm working within when I create this particular type of shape. If I was to start creating more shapes, you can see I'm adding more layers to the layers palette that I'm working in. Another option to pay attention to is towards the middle of your toolbox. Click and hold. Notice that new layer is selected. With this one, this is going to add a new layer every time you create a new shape. If you were to choose combine shape, in this case, I'm going to choose my first rectangle that we worked on. When I click and drag over it and create a new object on top of it, you can see that it adds on to, let's move these out of the way, it adds on to the shape that was on rectangle 1, and the lines intersect. I can even click and move this shape around, and it's going to still combine it with that layer, with that shape that's on that particular layer. Notice that because these other ones aren't on the same layer, it's not combining them, it's just overlapping with that one. And so those are the options you can do with those shape tools as well. If you needed to free draw a shape, I'm going to grab my pen tool. With my pen tool selected, oh, by the way, with the path palette open, you can see you've got the rectangular shape path that gives you a preview of what that shape looks like within that layer. Now if I've got my, let's go ahead and just delete these away. Am I sure? Yeah. With my regular pen tool that I'm drawing with, this will allow me to freehand draw over a particular shape that I want to work with. Clicking and dragging will allow me to create my paths and my vector points. With this one, you can see nothing is going to be filled in with it. This is because when you draw off a path, it's just going to create a vector path. Later on, you'll have to tell it what you want to fill it in with. If you look in your Paths palette, you can see you've got a layer called Work Path. Now, if I wanted to fill in my work path, first of all, make sure you're working on, I'm going to create a new transparent layer. It's very important you know what layer you're working on. I'm going to choose a fill color. Let's make one that we can see, so in this case red. And I've got my work path selected. I'll drag it over here so we can see both of them. To fill in the color, you can see I don't have the option up here at the top. Well, actually I do, but it's not allowing me to select it. Same way with the stroke. In my case, to fill it in, if you look at the very bottom left-hand side of your work path, clicking this icon will fill it in with those particular colors, with the foreground color that you had selected. Now I can move my path around, and just like a cookie cutter, I can click on it and fill in that area on my layer. All I'm doing is clicking that icon at the very edge of it. Now just make sure that you're working in the layer that you want to create these in. Notice that even though I've created 4 of them, all 4 are on the same layer that I'm working in. Let's delete that one out and create a new one. If I wanted to give my outline a stroked outline, my path that I'm working in, first of all, I need to choose what brush that I want it to be. And this is where it gets really cool. I can choose a brush, then go up to the top, choose any brush that you want to work with. In our case, let's choose one of the fancy brushes. You'll also need to set the size and the hardness that you want it to be. So I can just kind of test it out, and you can see that's what this one looks like. Let's choose an even fancier one. Okay, that'll work out. When I set the size and hardness of it, with this brush selected, it's going to follow the entire outline of the path using the brush that I had selected. To do this, choose the second option that's in the bottom left-hand side of your path palette. When you click on it, you can see now it fills in that particular area with your brush. You can then choose your path selection tool, move it around, and when you click, it'll do the same thing. Now notice, if I don't have my brush selected and I just click the outline, it's only going to make a thin penciled outline of what I have. And this is kind of a good way of creating just some basic outlines. But in order to get the brush effect, you've got to have your brush tool selected. And then you can click that one and it'll fill it in with a brush. Just as an added bonus, you don't have to necessarily use the regular paintbrush. You can use any type of brush, so you can use the clone stamp, an eraser brush. If you want to give precision to the stroke movements that you're using, that's how you can do it with this one. Let's see. We'll go ahead and delete that one away. The final thing you can do with a working path is to make selections. I'm going to delete this one in just a second. And in our case, we want to have these Chinese characters vectorized. The purpose of vectorizing something is so that you can actually make it bigger or smaller and without losing the detail. Now there's a couple of ways we can do this. First of all, I can choose my pen tool and I can go around and click around the entire object and redraw it. but that's going to take me a lot of time. I'm going to show you a time-saving technique that'll allow you to do this much more quickly. Let's select our Magic Wand tool. With Magic Wand selected, I can click on the area and notice that I had continuous turned off, and it's going to quickly outline everything that's that particular gray. I'm actually picking up a little more than I need to, so I'm going to turn tolerance or continuous back on. I'm going to even drop my tolerance down to, oh, let's say 20 pixels. Now when I select the area, I've got just what I want to work with. What I want to do is I can turn my selection into a path already. With my path selected, clicking on the center icon will convert whatever selection you have into a working path. And you can see now I've got an area that says work path, and you've got a little preview, and the area around my Chinese characters is now turned into a vectorized working path. I can click and move it around. You can see I can even edit the points all by itself. Now there is one downside to this. If you zoom in closely, you can see the edges are very jagged. It almost has too much detail. If you need to control the amount of detail, I'm going to back up to back when it's just a selected outline. To control the amount of detail around the edges, click on the down arrow at the top right hand side of the Paths palette and choose Make Work Path. This will give you a pop-up menu where you can type in a particular tolerance. You can see I had a very low tolerance within half a pixel. If I say did it within 2 pixels and hit OK, now you can see my outlines are much more smooth. As a matter of fact, I may be even missing some details. But it no longer has that jagged edge that I had before with the previous one. Of course, I can choose my direct selection tool, go in, and tweak and edit my paths that I'm working with from here as well to get it just where I need it to be. As with the other one, notice that I'm working in my own path. I'm going to create a new layer. With that path selected and with my foreground color chosen, I can then choose Fill Color, and it will fill in this particular Chinese characters that we're working with. Since it's a vector object, I can then choose this working path. I can hit Copy, paste them into another document. If you need to scale them up or change the size, you can always go to Edit, choose Transform Path, and here's your scale. And that'll allow you to change the size of it without affecting the overall resolution. I can then fill it in and continue working from there.